Okay, we are in Genesis chapter 27 this evening. Genesis chapter 27. So last week we were looking at Isaac and the troubles that he had with the king of one of the kings of the Philistines, and how God worked that out for him. And then it ended last week saying that Esau had married these two women from the land of the Canaanites, and that they were a grief of mind to his parents. And so as we pick up in Genesis chapter 27, Isaac is preparing to bless Esau. It says, now it came to pass, verse 1, when Isaac was old, and so he believes that he is reaching the end of his life. In Genesis 27, at this point, he is about 131 years old. And so that makes sense why he might think he's reaching the end of his life. That's a pretty long life. Of course, his father lived to be 175. But all the same, if I live to be 130, I'll feel pretty old. And so I understand where. But he says, of course, he won't actually die for about 50 more years after this. And so he's going to live for a long time. He lives even longer than his father, to be 180 years old. But he thinks that he's dying. And it says his eyes were so dim that he could not see. And so he's in essence blind. And he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son. And he answered him, here I am. And he said, behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, and that my soul may bless you before I die. And so, in essence, he's asking for his favorite meal to be potentially close to his last meal. He wants to make sure that he has this opportunity to bless his son before it's too late. And so verse 5, it says, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau, his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. And so she overhears everything that is said, and she sees her oldest son Esau leaving to do what his father has asked him to do. And in Esau's absence, she sees this opportunity where she can trick her husband into giving the blessing to her favorite son, Jacob. And that's what verse 6, it says, Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring from me there 2 choice kids of the goats, that I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. And then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, and that he may bless you before his death. And so I'll make the food, you get the blessing. That's kind of the idea. And so Jacob is concerned about this plan, and he says in verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man. It's that from his birth, he was born red hair everywhere. It says he's a very hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. And perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver. And he says, I shall seem to be a deceiver to him. That's just called deception, but this is, I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. And so Jacob is saying, this isn't going to work. Right? There's too many holes and flaws in your plan, Mom. But she continues in verse 13, and his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Right? I will take responsibility. I will take the consequences if anything goes wrong. And only obey my voice and go get them for me. And so he went, and he got them, and he brought them to his mother. And his mother made savory food, such as his father loved. And Rebekah took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and she put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats on the hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she gave the savory food and the bread, which she had prepared, into the hand of her son Jacob. And so she's a very quick thinking and obviously very skilled, that she can pull together this meal and also not just dress him in clothes, but take the skin from the goats that they had just killed and, make something that can fit on his neck and on the back of his hands, so that he very much appears and feels to be Esau. And so Jacob, verse 18, went to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here am I. Who are you, my son?" Remember, he is practically blind. He can't see. And so he's asking for some clarity here. And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn, and I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit, and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." And so Isaac had some doubts from the start. Uh, it's going to say that he recognizes it's not Esau's voice, but he has some doubts here, and he says first of all, verse 20, he says, Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" Right? So his first doubt is, that was extremely fast. That I expected it to take you much longer to be able to go and to find something and then to kill it and then to cook it and so forth and so on. But Jacob has an answer. He says, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." So God blessed me in this. Next, Jacob's doubt is about his voice, as Tina mentioned. Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." And so Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "Well, the voice is Jacob's voice." And he can tell it doesn't sound like Esau, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Right? So all senses considered, you feel like you are Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy, like his brother Esau's hands. And so he blessed him. Now, that's not the blessing. That's, in essence, he greeted him, kind of saying, "You are my son Esau." But the test continues. First, does it taste like Esau's food? That's kind of his next test. It says, "Are you really my son Esau?" And Jacob says, "I am." He said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you." And so he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And then it's going to be, well, does he smell like Esau? And we learned a couple chapters back, Esau spent all of his time outdoors. Jacob spent all of his time indoors at the tents. And so if you spend all of your time indoors, you're going to smell different than someone who spends all of his time outdoors. And so his father Isaac said to him, "Come near now and kiss me, my son." And he came near, and he kissed him. And he smelled the smell of his clothing. And so finally he's convinced. He blessed him and said, "Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed." It doesn't sound like Esau, but the food seems like Esau's. His hands feel like Esau's. He smells like Esau. He showed up like Esau was supposed to. And so he blesses him. Verse 28, "Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine." And so this blessing, and this was a common thing that fathers did when they were dying. They gave these blessings to their sons, and they were supposed to sort of carry the as if by inspiration of God, kind of carry a prophecy of what would come to them after his father was gone. And so he's blessing him, first of all, with enough food, that he'll always have plenty of whatever he grows, of the ability to grow things, the dew of heaven, fatness of the earth, so that he always has enough. It says grain and wine. And then second, verse 29, it says, "Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you, but be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you." And so the next blessing is that he'll be the master of all who are around him, all the nations, including his own relatives who live near to him. Now, of course, like many of these blessings, this is not fulfilled in Jacob's lifetime. Jacob himself is not ever the master of Esau or his descendants or the people who live around him. Just like Abraham was promised the land, but we know that they didn't really own that land until the time of Joshua. This does not come, not fulfilled until the time of Solomon. And you can see that in 1 Kings chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 9 and verses 20 and 21. In 1 Kings 9, starting in verse 20, it says, "All the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, who were not of the children of Israel." Right? So remember, he is describing here the people that in the time of Joshua, they were supposed to have completely destroyed, but that they failed to destroy in that time. He's listing all of those people, and he says that is their descendants who were left in the land after them, whom the children of Israel had not been able to destroy completely. From these, Solomon raised forced labor, as it is to this day. Right? Finally, because of the warfare that David did, all of these people are under the control of Solomon's kingdom at this time. And so just as Isaac has promised here, the nations will bow down to you. You'll be master over your brethren. And that's we see in other places that David had conquered over the nations of Edom and Moab. And so they also were under Solomon's reign at this time. And so it does reach fulfillment in the time of Solomon. And then he continues in verse 29, and he says, "Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who blessed you." Now this is what God had told Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, when he first called him out of his homeland and told him to go to the promised land. This was in there as well. "Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be he who blesses you." God is going to be with Jacob. And so if an enemy tries to curse him, it's going to backfire because God is with him. And likewise, those who bless Jacob will be blessed in return. So these are the blessings that he gives. He thinks he's given them to Esau. He gives them to Jacob. Now, this is going to come up later. But notice what is lacking from these blessings that he's giving Esau. There's nothing here about the promises of Abraham. The idea that he would inherit all of the land, and not here when he thinks he's blessing Esau. Now we'll talk more about that later on in this chapter, but any other thoughts or comments of what we looked at so far? Yes, ma'am. Right, yes. So two distinct things there. In the previous couple of chapters ago, Esau gave away his birthright. That is the portion, the double portion of when your father dies, you get twice as much of his stuff as your brother does. This is the blessing. And so that's the verbal sort of, I bless you with. This is not about his things. It's about the blessing from God. And so he gets that first blessing from his father. And there are two distinct, and we'll see that in the next little section. Esau is going to describe both of those things. First, he stole my birthright. Now he's also taken my blessing. Two distinct things that Jacob steals from Esau. So that's a good question. Was there another hand?
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Like the cursed be everyone who curses you. Because whenever Israel is trying to go back to the promised land, and Edom won't let them pass through and tries to curse them, then that becomes a big problem for Edom. And then like later when Babylon comes and takes people out of Jerusalem and people from Edom come and try to like plunder, and that turns out really bad for Edom. I feel like this blessing right here backfires on Esau's people a lot.
Yes.
Because they just keep cursing the Israelites and they don't learn their lesson.
So she's referencing several times in the children of Israel's history when they either seek help from the nation of Edom, which of course is the descendants of Esau, or the descendants of Esau take advantage of the children of Israel, and that in essence they curse them, and that it backfires on them. There's kind of an irony to that this was intended for Esau, but Jacob steals it, and that backfires on his descendants later on, and so they become cursed because they curse his descendants. All right, any other thoughts or comments where we are right now? Okay, verse 30 then continues, and we see Esau's distress, and then the blessing that his father does end up giving him. It says, "It happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had barely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father." And so it's just a hair's breadth of time that Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting. And so really you think Esau did return fairly quickly to be able to go out and to hunt and then come back and skin and cook and all those things in the same amount of time that they prepared that, and Jacob stole the blessing. That really was pretty quick that Esau was able to get his game for his father. And it says in verse 31, he also had made savory food, and he brought it to his father, and he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? And so he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. And then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, who? Where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him. And indeed, he shall be blessed. In other words, I can't take it back. And so verse 34, when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, O my father. But Isaac said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. And so Isaac pretty quickly figures out what happened, how all of this came to be. But he says, I can't take it back. Once I've given that blessing, there's no way that I can take it from him and give it to you. And so Esau is upset about this naturally, and he said, is he not rightly named Jacob? And Jacob means supplanter or deceiver. Supplanter being, someone who kind of takes something that belongs to somebody else. And he was named that because when he came out of the womb, he was holding on to the heel of his brother. And so they named him Jacob, right? Someone who's taking some, and so it says, is he not rightly named deceiver or supplanter? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. First, he took away my birthright. My dad is going to give him a double portion of all his goods that was supposed to be mine. And now, look, he has also taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And so Isaac answered and said to Esau, indeed, I have made him your master. Here's what I did. I made him your master. All his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What now shall I do for you, my son? And so Esau said to his father, he said, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and he wept. And so, in essence, Isaac was intending to give Esau a lot. And he really apparently wasn't intending to bless Jacob with very much as far as this blessing goes. He was going to get that double portion either way, but as far as this blessing goes. But Isaac, his father, answered, and he said to him, goes ahead and he blesses Esau. He says, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. Now, he doesn't put in there the line about how he'll have plenty of grain and wine, but he says at least the conditions will be favorable. And he says, by your sword you shall live. Now, we've seen this before. Who else was it prophesied would live by the sword? Ishmael. That's right. When Hagar finds God in the wilderness, when she runs away from Sarah, and it says he'll be, I think it says a wild man or something to that effect. And he'll be a warrior. He'll live by the sword. And you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass that when you become restless, then you shall break his yoke from your neck. And so this is what he can give his son. He says, the land will be favorable. Well, that was already true because he'd said it for Jacob, so it'd be true anyway. But and while you have to serve your brother for a time, eventually you'll be able to throw your brother off of your. He won't be the master of you anymore. Escape from Jacob's rule. And so this, just like the previous one about how he'll rule over everybody, this comes to fulfillment during the time of the kings. We can see 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 14. In 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 14, this is when David conquers Esau's descendants, the Edomites. It says he also put garrisons in Edom, and throughout all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. And so just as was prophesied, Esau's descendants become the servants of Jacob's descendants. But then, if you look in 1 Kings chapter 11, 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 14, in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 14, now this is Solomon, and remember he's the wisest of all kings. No one in all the land and all the world at that time who could hold a candle to Solomon until, what is it that kind of led Solomon away from God? His wives, that's right. The wives that he had who worshipped idols convinced him. Yes.
But that's what I was going to say about wives.
Okay.
Why didn't he think about his wife? He surely knew she was complicit in this decision.
Oh, yes. It doesn't address that, does it? It just doesn't tell us. Yes. I kind of wonder about that too. You know, did he put it all together? Or, I don't know, but it just doesn't tell us any kind of trouble that came for Rebecca because of this. So, yeah.
They were all pretty easily deceived, weren't they?
Apparently they were. Yes, Johnny.
Also, back in Genesis 27, back in verse 36, Esau himself is not totally honest about what he says here, is it? He took away my birthright.
Oh, yeah.
Did he give it away?
Yeah, he gave it away. Yeah, there's a little bit of the rewriting history to make you look a little better kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, he took it because he's initiated all that, but Esau gave it willingly, and so yeah, you're absolutely right about that. A bowl of soup. That's right. So this is in 1 Kings 11. This is Solomon when he is led astray by his wives, and so you can see in starting in verse 11 of chapter 11, the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days, for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. And I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." And then the very next verse, right? David is the one who conquers the Edomites. Solomon is his son, so we're just one generation later. And he messes up. And the very next verse, verse 14, it says, "The Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon." And guess where he is from? He's Hadad the Edomite. Right? He's from Edom. And he's going to cause Solomon a lot of trouble during the rest of Solomon's reign. It was supposed to be a reign of peace where there was never any war. Didn't turn out that way. And Hadad causes a lot of those problems. And then if you turn to 2 Kings chapter 8, 2 Kings chapter 8, starting in verse 20. In 2 Kings chapter 8, starting in verse 20, it says, during the reign of Jehoram, it says, "In his days, Edom revolted against Judah's authority, and they made a king over themselves." And it describes how he went out and he rose by night and attacked the Edomites who had surrounded him and the captives, and the troops fled to their tents. "Thus Edom has been in revolt against Judah's authority to this day." And so, no, the Ishmaelites, certainly you see them. The Edomites, you don't really see the traces of them anymore. They've kind of gotten lost to history. But yeah, some of those same peoples you are seeing over there still, and still fighting, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's when the time came, Esau's descendants threw off Jacob's descendants, just like Jacob prophesied here. And so you can see these really are, that these blessings are also prophecies of what is to come when they were with godly men who were inspired by God as they told them. All right, any thoughts or comments on what we've looked at so far? Okay. So then, of course, there's the fallout and the consequences that come from all of this chaos. Verse 41, "So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, 'The days of mourning for my father are at hand.'" Now remember, in reality, he's not going to die for about 50 years. But they all think he's dying. And so he says, "My father will be dead soon, and then I will kill my brother Jacob." And so he kind of nurses this fantasy that he can take out his vengeance and feel better about himself and be able to take all of the portions of Esau and never have to submit to, all the portions of Isaac and never have to submit to Jacob. He kind of tells himself this. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, and so she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days, until your brother's fury turns away." Now she says a few days. How long was Jacob in Haran? 20 years. That's right. He was there for 20 years. maybe not her intentions, but that's how these consequences turned out. Until verse 45, your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him, and then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And so Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, like these who are the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? And so, in essence, Esau says he hates Jacob. That's the process of finding a way to make somebody appear to you less than human so you don't have a problem with killing them. He hates him. He plans to kill him soon. And of course, hindsight is always 2020. And if they could have looked back beforehand, maybe they would have done these things different. But Rachel takes action when she learns of Esau's plan. And so she commands Jacob to go to her brother Laban in Haran. Right, this is where Abraham came from. This is where Rebekah herself came from. She moved there from Haran. And she tells Isaac she doesn't want Jacob to marry the kinds of people that Esau married. Remember, that was at the end of chapter 26, when it said he married these two women and they were a grief of mind to her parents, as we talked about last week, probably because they were idol worshippers and all of the complications and problems that came with that. And so she is bringing up a legitimate concern here, but of course she has ulterior motives in what she's doing. In order to save her son from Esau. And so Isaac agrees to this plan. And it says in chapter 28 in verse 1, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughter of Laban, your mother's brother. Now, this is similar to what Abraham does to Isaac, but how is it different than what Abraham does for Isaac, as far as finding a wife goes?
He inquires of God for a mate.
I'm sorry, say it one more
He
time.
inquires of God for a mate.
The servant, yeah, he prays to God about it. That's true, yeah. And then there's one other difference, at least one other difference that he makes as well between how Abraham handles finding Isaac a wife and Isaac handles finding Jacob a wife from...
He said Jacob instead of a servant.
That's right, yeah. Abraham was insistent, wasn't he? You will not take Isaac back to my father's household. You will not take him anywhere close to the idol worshippers that I come from, out of fear perhaps that Isaac would get too comfortable there or pick up some bad habits or what have you, and they would miss out on this promise of this land that God had said they would dwell in someday. But because they have used deception and these means to obtain what they wanted, their hands are forced now. They feel at least like they have to get Jacob out of there in order to save Jacob's life. And so this is the next logical place for Jacob to go, back to her brother's household. And so we're going to see there's a lot of consequences that come from that. And one of them, and this is just my opinion, but one of them is, I imagine, if things had been different and Isaac could have sent a servant to find Jacob a wife, how many wives do you think that he would have brought back? Just one, probably. I don't know if it would have been Leah or Rachel. I don't know. Maybe Leah would have already been married to somebody else or what, but just one wife. And there would have been a lot less of that difficulty that they all face because of the jealousy of those sisters and so forth and so on. But of course, as we always see, God works those things out. But that's at least one, I think, of the problems that comes from sending Jacob back instead of having someone go get a wife for Jacob. So he commands him in verse 2 to go. And in verse 3, now here I think this is really important. Verse 3, he gives Jacob, and this is the first time that he blesses Jacob on purpose. I want you to notice the blessing that he intends for Jacob. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, right? You'll be a really great nation, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. Now, we pointed this out earlier, but this was lacking in the blessing that Isaac intended for I'm sorry, for Cain, Esau, for Esau. I'm getting all the brothers mixed up now. But he specifically blesses Jacob here, knowing who it is, with Abraham's blessing, right? He's receiving the promises to carry forward. And that's what, you go back and you remember when Rebecca was pregnant and she was concerned about it. And so she seeks God's counsel. What's wrong with my baby? And he tells her it's actually two babies, and that the older shall serve the younger, and that there seems to be this kind of understanding here of Jacob is going to take Esau's place in some way or another. And so she hears that Isaac is going to bless Esau, and doesn't say anything about blessing Jacob. And so she jumps into action. And I've heard people say, and I don't know, it may be true, I've heard people say, well, Rebecca was thinking about that promise that God made. And she's thinking, no, you can't bless Esau, you have to bless Jacob, because he is the one that God chose to carry all of this forward. Maybe it doesn't say she was thinking that. Maybe she was thinking that. But even if she was thinking that, you notice that's not what Isaac does for Esau. And the first time that he gets an opportunity to bless Jacob and do it intentionally, he gives him Abraham's blessing. Maybe that's what he was going to do all along. Maybe after he blessed Esau, he would have called Isaac and said, whatever his skill was inside the tents, do that for me, and I'll give you a different blessing. Maybe it was going to be this blessing right here about carrying on this seed, this promise of Abraham. And so at any rate, he receives it now. And it says in verse 5, Jacob obeys. Isaac sent Jacob away. He went to Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Goes back where he's told to go. So any thoughts or comments on that section right there before we kind of wrap this up? Okay. Verses 6 through 9 then, everything kind of comes full circle. And it says, Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take himself a wife from there. And that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge saying, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. This seems to be the first time that Esau really puts all this together for himself. And that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padan Aram. And also Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. And so he does what he generally does. He just jumps into action. Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife in addition to the wives that he already had. So he says, well, my parents don't like the wives that I have, so maybe this one will be more pleasing to him. And you notice there's not really an indication that he asked them, is this pleasing? Would you want me to marry this woman or not? He just kind of jumps right back into it. And I think this is important here because it seems like Abraham intended monogamy. I mean, he was married to Sarah, and as far as we know, Sarah alone for, what was it, close to 90 years before Sarah suggests that he take Hagar as his concubine. I don't know, but certainly there's no indication of any others before then. And so it seems they could, and it could just be that we're not told about the others, but it certainly doesn't tell us about the others. And so it seems possible anyway. And that's the same with Isaac. It seems that, no one else has ever mentioned. Rebecca is the only person that's ever mentioned as far as Isaac is concerned. But Esau is taking cues from the culture around him. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, do you have a hand raised over here? No, okay. Esau is taking cues from the culture around him. As they mentioned, their culture of the Canaanites is very much to marry many women. And so, his first marriage was to two women just right off the start. And so as he's taking that culture from around him, you see it's causing his family lots of problems. And that's why I think probably they would have intended Jacob just to marry one. And that's what he tried to do too. And then, kind of got tricked. It kind of comes back around to him. He deceived people and now he's being deceived. And so at any rate, I think one of the major themes in the book of Genesis is when there is a breakdown in communication between husbands and wives, it generally leads to sin. And that's, you go back to the garden with Adam and Eve, and we're told that they did that out of order, and that she, the First Timothy in chapter 2 talks about this, that she was deceived, and Adam did not communicate. He was not deceived, but he did not communicate to her, what you're doing will be sinful. You've been deceived into this. That breakdown led to sin. And that's the same thing here. Isaac and Rebekah are not communicating with each other about these things. Rebekah is working behind his back about all of this. And look at all of the hatred and the sin that was brought into their family, the deception and everything, because that breakdown has happened. And so when husbands and wives, when the communication breaks down, everybody is impacted, but clearly especially the children. And you see that in Cain and Abel and the things that happened to them. And you see that here with Jacob and Esau. And brothers who were not particularly close before this, clearly they had issues, but it escalates so much worse because of that breakdown. I also kind of wonder, where was the communication with God through all of this? Because we've seen Isaac and Rebekah do that before. And you remember that from chapter 25, when it says after 20 years, Rebekah had not had a baby. And so he pleads with the Lord about it, and she conceives. And then when she's concerned about the baby within her, she turns to the Lord and receives the information that this is something that they have done before. But despite all of their concerns and difficulties for each of these 4 people through this chapter, there at least is no mention of anybody turning to God and saying, how should we handle this? What should we do moving forward? More like Sarah with Hagar, they're just sort of taking initiative. And you notice Isaac and Rebekah don't make that mistake originally. Whenever Abraham and Sarah have so much trouble, they come up with this plan with Hagar. Isaac doesn't do that. He turns to the Lord, and it turns out so much better, doesn't it? But here they make more similar kinds of mistakes, have similar kinds of problems between them. And of course, ultimately, we know vengeance is never mine. Vengeance is gone. Esau's plans for vengeance backfires, and Jacob is blessed even greater because of the result of Esau planning to kill his brother. And we see, as always, God does work all of these things out. They made some mistakes, but all the promises and all the things that God knew would be good, he finds a way to work those out despite those mistakes. All right, any other thoughts or comments before we close? All right, well, thank you for your attention, and next week we'll finish up chapter 28, and I'll let Johnny